All right, next section is groundwater protection. Remember earlier I told you that we don't have a lot of radon issues because the soil's got a lot of clay in it. That kind of helps us out. As far as groundwater problems though, it hurts us. All right, groundwater, they talk about this thing called the water table. And in central Indiana, the water table can be as low as 12 feet. I mean, it's just 12 feet below the surface. But because the soil has a lot of clay in it, when the stuff hits that clay, it runs right along the clay right to wherever the water source is. Like your well, if you live in a country, or Eagle Creek, or any of those other water places that we get stuff from. All right? So you have to be careful, and it's not really a big deal if it's your Sprite from Kmart that you spilled, but what if it's the creosote from blacktopping roads, or the farmer spraying all the pesticides and insecticides that now get into the well. So that's why we have issues with groundwater and the Safe Drinking Water Act. Now we've got issues with this thing called fracking. Those mother frackers are doing that stuff, and they crack, all they're doing is cracking that plate to get to the oil. There could be issues of all that, now they crack it loose, there's going to be some liquid that's going to run somewhere, right? So if you get a glass of water and it's brown, don't drink that one, all right? Which, by the way, we also get lead-based paint poisoning. Could be from old lead pipes too, or lead solder that put pipes together. That's been all that. One of the big things the EPA was against was these things called underground storage tanks, or UST. And I'll show you how much of a nerd we were as an engineer. We used to call them leaking underground storage tanks so we could say the word lust and get away with it. It's a lust. An L-U-S-T, a leaking underground storage tank. Don't laugh, man. That's what the only break this nerd's got. That was the problem, was the leaking underground storage tanks. And if you guys are old enough to remember back, right in 1999 and 2000, they did this big, massive thing called all the tank yanks, where they took all the gas station tanks out of the ground because they were eroding and corroding, and all the gas was seeping out into the land. That's what we're talking about. All those leaking underground storage tanks. So they came out with this federal UST program to dictate, hey, you've got to take that tank out, and that's what we said, we euphemistically in the business called it a tank yank. And there were companies making millions of dollars those couple years because they were just charging anything they wanted, because the government said you've got to take that out of the ground and put in a PVC tank, dual-walled polyvinyl chlorinated tank, so that it'll never erode. All right, because mainly it was the gasoline in the soil getting to the water table coming from the underground storage tanks. Most notably, the leaking underground storage tanks. Now, when I was in the corporate world, one of the things we used to tell people was the EPA doesn't give a damn about you. They do not. They care about the population of the city, but not individual people. They were more than happy. Well, I don't say more than happy. OSHA's the same way. You know, they were more than happy. Hey, if we can install a safety system, even if it runs a company out of business because they can't afford to do that, we're okay with that. Because they were more interested in protecting a mass population than maybe one or two people. And if you don't believe me, look at some of the exemptions to this underground storage tank rule. How many gallons of gasoline would you have to take to die? To drink to die? Apparently, EPA says less than 110 gallons if you spill it, we don't care. Yeah. So they're not really looking for a person. They just want to make sure you don't get into like Eagle Creek Reservoir and kill thousands of people. Because if you spill less than 110 gallons, we don't care. All right? Any farm tanks. So I guess the gasoline on a farm that gets in the water tastes different than the gasoline that comes. No, they exempted all the farm usage. Heating oil. I guess you can live if you drink heating oil. Apparently, because they don't give a damn about it either, they're just trying to get to gasoline. So heating oil was exempt. That's where you guys will run into a lot of tanks. If you start selling older farmlands, you know, you may get a farmhouse that's been around that was by heating oil. it's exempt from the underground storage tank laws. Because all they really care about is gasoline. All right? What we call octane, straight 8, methyl ethyl death. Tanks sitting on the floor, even if they are underground. So theoretically, if you guys were like underground storage tanks, because you're technically under the ground level, since we had to come down to the classroom, but you're sitting on a cement floor, you would be exempt.
Eggs are right on here.
Yeah, I'm sure there is.
And mold.
Definitely mold in here. What's worse, there's spiders in here too. I've seen that.
Right.
And that's what I don't like. I was talking one day and one came like right down from the ceiling and it's like, hey, you didn't pay the fee, get out. All the other tanks, they're exempt too. Septic tanks, rainwater tanks, wastewater tanks, runoff tanks. So literally what they're doing is trying to get at the gasoline company. We'll see how that plays out a little bit more. So then they have this thing called a brownfield. A brownfield is an old industrial site that has been abandoned or derelict, and because of that, there are chemicals that are laying around, and we had to get rid of them. And one of the things that they could do was take him to a landfill or a waste disposal site and realize that a landfill is nothing but a hole in the ground, and sometimes you hear that hole in the ground called a tomb, because that's where chemicals go to die. What they would do is line that hole with like some kind of visqueen or clay or stuff. Then they would throw the crap in and seal it off, put a cap over it. And then Diane, what would they do with old landfills that have been capped?
Build on it.
What kind of building?
Probably production home.
No.
I don't know.
Well, you're the golfer. I thought maybe you played at Duffer Park or Twin Bridges, or they put golf courses on them. Very common. It's a very common thing because there doesn't have to be a lot of impact study. Duffer Park is one. Twin Bridges out in Danville is one. I'm sure there's all over the country.
They're not running any like city utilities or anything.
No, there's no utilities. There's no impact. They're not building foundations. So they build parks on them and golf courses and things like that.
So Trump gets that land pretty cheap. Trump.
Well, usually the person that owns that land starts a golf course. Twin Bridges is a golf course that is owned by Waste Management out in Danville. If you've never been out there, you need to go really look at it. It's kind of cool.
It's beautiful.
Because they actually run their entire complex on the electric that they generate from the waste. Because what's a byproduct of okay, I can't even get you guys to say it. Methane. When you fart, it's methane. It's all the
Really, we would have said that.
Well, haven't you seen on YouTube where they like the fart?
How many weeks have
Is
we
that gonna
been
be on
here?
the
Have
test?
we guessed one word? That
No,
you're
you have
trying
not
to
guessed
say?
one word. And don't look at me like that's my fault, all right?
It's you.
Well, what I was going to say is, what's the byproduct of decomposition of organic material? Methane. Hey, dinosaur farts are oil. It is. Part of the dinosaur. So the point I'm getting at, that's not on the test. Feel free.
Dinosaur farts.
In the tomb, and if you go to Twin Bridges, as that stuff decomposes in there, they off-gas that, they light that vent heats the water to create steam, which turns the turbine, which creates electricity. So they power their own stuff based on their own stuff.
We're going to talk about what happens when you do a fluorocarbon with methane.
Yeah,
Light your farts on fire.
yeah.
Wow.
But see, they do that at Twin Bridges, which is a golf course. So go out there and play that course
It is pretty.
and look at all of the structures and buildings. It's all being run on that landfill. And if you make enough, I think they actually sell it back to the utility. And the utilities have to buy it. All right? So those brownfields, what was happening is they were causing issues, and then we started putting them in the storage tank or putting them in the landfill. Then what happened is they ran out and decided, let's clean it up. So now we come to probably the most important part, as far as I'm concerned, in the commercial world, And this is what I did in the corporate world. So what happened is the government says we're going to clean this up. They clean these brownfields up, and they put these all on what they call the NPL, the National Priorities List. You don't need to know that, but they would number them. Then they would give them money to clean it up. When they did that, they created what was called the Comprehensive Environmental Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA. CERCLA says we will give you a bunch of money, $9 billion with a B, which in today's world, Bank of America lost half of that in about 8 hours. But it was such a big number in 1980, they gave it a nickname called Superfund. You'll need to know that. It's called Superfund because $9 billion was such a big number then. Now here's what happened. CERCLA says we'll clean all this up, but we are going to get our money back from the PERPs, PRP, potentially responsible parties. Okay? So we'll pay for it up front, but we're getting our money back. It is real easy to win a game if, when it's your turn to play, you change the rules, which is what CERCLA did. CERCLA says, okay, we'll pony up the money and we'll pay, and we're going to get it back from these PERPs, and here's how we're going to define a potentially responsible party. They created these 3 liabilities. The first liability is called strict, meaning you did it. I don't care. If you ever touched the land, you created the mess, and we're coming after you. So they created a strict liability. The second one they created was joint and several, which means we'll come after one of you to get our money back, or we'll come after a bunch of you jointly to get our money back. And if that's not the big kick in the ding-ding, here's the last one. It's called retroactive. So it doesn't matter that we're playing this game in 1980. If you owned the property in 1920, we're going back after you then. So what they said was, if you've owned the property, you made the mess. That's strict liability. We don't care when you own the property, we're still coming after you. And we'll come after as many of you as we have to get our money back. Joint and several. So if you owned that corner gas station for 6 days in 1930, you're on their hit list. And CERCLA was coming after everybody. All right?
When they raid the whorehouse, they take the piano player too.
Yes, exactly. They take coming after everybody. I'll have to remember that. In case you didn't hear that at home, that's words of wisdom. When they raid the whorehouse, they take the piano player too.
Yes.
Organ player, piano player, what's the difference?
DJ,
DJ.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. Trust me. So here's what happens with CERCLA. CERCLA blows through this $9 billion. Poof, gone. In like 4 years. And I don't even think a woman could do that. $9 billion in 4 years? I probably could. See that movie, Brewsters Million? Where he had to spend like $30 million to inherit 300 and all the stuff he couldn't do. I said, if that was me, that would be really simple, because I'd have turned to John Candy and said, let's go out and play catch. I'll pay you $30 million. Done. All right. So CERCLA blows through all of this money, and they go back to government, and they say, we need more money. So the government says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create this thing called the Superfund Amendment and Reauthorization Act, or we call it SARA, S-A-R-A. But here's what SARA's claim to fame was. In the movie Stripes, remember the guy that says, "My name's Francis, you call me Francis, I'll kill you."
Lighten Up Francis.
What's he say? You're the first person that's really got that. What's
Yeah.
the sheriff turn around, or the sergeant turn around and says,
Lighten up.
"Lighten up, Francis." That's what Sarah told CERCLA. We'll give you more money, but you gotta lighten up. This strict liability crap ain't gonna cut it. So Sarah created this thing called the Innocent Landowner Act. And I will tell you, it's got about 14 names. The Innocent Landowner Development Act, the Innocent Land Act, the Innocent Landowner Act. Virtually what it's saying is this: if you can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's no way in hell you created this mess, you may get out of this CERCLA's trap. Or if you can prove you were lied to. So like I bought it from Sunoco, but Sunoco showed me fake papers that said they cleaned it up, and then I bought it. I'm out of that loop because I bought it erroneously. That could also potentially get me out. But you have to be able to prove that. So if say I bought a gas station, an old used gas station, and I make it Raymond's Flower Shop, there are pretty good odds that I didn't do the underground storage tank issues, right? But once I made it Raymond's Flower Shop and small engine repair. Good combination, all right? That could potentially say, you know what? There might have been a chance that when you're repairing engines, you got stuff leaked, so no, you're not out. So that's basically what Sarah did. It came up with this, "Lighten up, Francis. We will give you more money." And they gave like another $9 billion. They reauthorized it. But they also amended it to say, dude, lighten up, Francis. Now, what does this mean towards you guys? And I want to skip over to page 416 and talk about an environmental site assessment real quick. Let's go back to a question I asked you about value. One of the questions was T, transferability. And I asked you, I said, what's the value of a property, a $100,000 property with a $2 million environmental cleanup? We all agreed that the value was 0. Would you hate to have been the bank that loaned that $100,000? Because now you got a guy that's like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to walk away from this. All right? In order to keep that from happening, we now have these things called a phase 1 and a phase 2. And that's why I told you they break out industrial different from commercial on the other chapter, because this happens a lot. When a buyer goes to buy property in something that may be considered a potential risk area, like an industrial zoned property, the lender doesn't want to loan money and get in that problem, so the lender's going to tell his client, i.e. the buyer, hey, have you asked for a phase 1 on this property? A phase 1 is a desk audit that is usually done by the seller, who pays for this. And what it does is, if you think back to the chain of title, we talked about Bob sold it to Sue, sold it to Mary, and we talked about the people and all that. Think of a phase 1 as the same concept, but I don't really care who owned it. What was it? Gas station to gas station to gas station to gas station for the last 20 years. That's what a phase 1 does. Now they do obviously care who owns it because they're going to report those names eventually, but they're more looking at what it was rather than who it was. Because what are the odds that this gas station has been a gas station for the last 50 years, that it's probably got leaking gasoline down there and contaminated? Probably pretty good. So at the end of the phase 1, when they do this pedigree search, they're going to come back with this. In our professional opinion, there's a chance that this could be harmed. So they're going to ask you to do a phase 2. A phase 2, maybe you guys have seen this before, is where they literally go out with those little well drilling rigs and drill holes in the property. They take those holes to a lab, which is the lab I was just telling you I was the director of, and we could sample the soil and go, yeah, we found straight 8 octane in that soil. What's that tell you? Hey, there's a leaking underground storage tank somewhere. What we just did was protect the lender from getting in that situation of being on the hook for $100,000 on $1 million cleanup, because the lender's going to go, sorry, not loaning you the money. So phase one and potentially the phase two are deal breakers or very common in the commercial world. We don't do them in the residential because all those are exempt. Heating oil is exempt, cisterns are exempt, runoff tanks are exempt, so we don't do those. But in the commercial world, we do it a lot. And it's very common now. So when you go to buy a property, most of the time the seller's going to tell you, hey, we've already done the phase one, here's the report, we'll put a copy in your name and they'll guarantee it by this company, yada, yada, yada. So part of your job or part of your discovery process in the environmental hazards may simply be, we need to call an environmental company because I don't know, I can't do a phase one, but we need to have one done. And if I'm listing the property, I can guarantee a buyer's going to ask, we might as well go ahead and pay it now. You know, it's going to take 4 or 5 months and about $1,200–1,500 bucks, but that's just the cost of doing business. So that is called the environmental site assessment to make sure. Now, if they do find it's contaminated, that's when they get into that whole digging the soil out, and you've seen those signs that say clean fill dirt wanted. That's what they're doing, replacing it, pack it down, then go through the process again, get a clean bill of health. Now the lender can go on and say, yes, I'll loan you the money. That's the whole point in that. An impact statement, and I jokingly said this a minute ago, and once again, I tell you jokes for a reason. Remember I told you the developer's going to develop that and see if he's in the three-toed sloths area and all that. That would be the environmental impact statement. And I'm telling you now, most of your big national builders like TK or something like that, they have got biologists on staff that do things like that. Are we in the wetlands? Are we somewhere where the birds migrate? We can't disturb this land. What's the impact? Noise could be an impact. What is the impact of this new development of homes that maybe we are into the three-toed sloth tree and we can't tear it down and build? So those all come from the environmental impact statement.
You said who employs people like this?
All those, some of those big major home builders that can afford it, like TK is an example. I would say if somebody builds 1 or 2 homes a year, they probably don't have a person on staff, but they still have to do something, so they may contract that out to do a site assessment, or an impact statement, rather. And all of the environmental hazards, you guys are going to have to know some of these to disclose them. This is going to be in that commercial world, where part of your learning curve, if you list commercial, you may have to have a 20 or 30-minute discussion just on environmental issues. Hey, have you done a phase one yet? Do we know of anything? What about our underground? What's our neighbor? Because I've been involved in deals where we weren't the problem, but the gas station on the corner was, because it was leaking onto our property, which makes it our problem. All right? And we had a big lawsuit about who's going to clean it up prior to us even get the property listed, because the guy didn't know that until I went on and go, have we done phase one? He's like, what's phase one? So then we went into phase two, found contamination because the oil plume from the gas station had come crossed his boundary into his land. Now we've got an issue. So you will get involved into environmental, but sometimes it's mainly as, have you done this? We better get it done. I'm not going to do it, but let's call, Jeff Westell or whoever it is. All right, any questions on the environmental world? I would definitely know the lead-based paint form. I would definitely know all those dates, 78 for lead-based paint. All right, they really like that. Encapsulation, both asbestos and all that. A little bit about some of those hazardous chemicals. We're not going to ask you to name 37 of the PCBs. Just know it's a high temperature dielectric oil, on the banned list. It's a group of chemicals, just generic issues like that. There is a couple questions, I think. It talks about where would you find a couple of these different things, like PCBs are in computers. You could get mold in drywall, issues like that. All right, any questions? Well, I thank you very much for this chapter, and we're out.